Hi everyone, welcome back. Julius here. And today we are officially beginning our advanced Excel course here on YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, using Excel functions may sometimes be very draining. You may try to use the functions, but you don't understand how to use them. Well, this is something common with many people. I also experienced the problems when I was, of course, starting this. But when you have the basic understanding of very basic Excel functions, and of course, you know very well how to clearly interpret the Excel function requirements, then this becomes very easy. And that is why in this first video, we're going to go through very basic Excel functions and try to understand how do we interpret Excel functions. Well, let's jump over to it. Well, here I am on Excel, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to use this basic data, this simple data for basic Excel function understanding. Now, what you saw on my screen here is just some sample data, which has just been created simply just for the purposes of this learning. So here I have my different projects here. I have the financials of the project, and then I have the total project cost here. The very first basic Excel function that we're going to cover is what we call here the sum function. What I want to get here is the total cost that was spent on this project, on all these projects. We have got higher learning, seeds and fertilizer, relief aid, farm tools and implements. We have power connectivity, medical, research, and road construction. So I want to find out what was the total amount of money spent on all these projects. To do this, we can say equals. Then once we type equal sign, we can say equals. Then we just click on that value because we want to add 149 plus 794 plus 1,593. But this process is a bit tedious. This is what we call using formulas. Understand from the very beginning that we have a difference between a formula and a function. So what we are using right now is a formula. But using functions is very much simpler. So instead of doing all this, because I want to add, I will simply use the sum function. So I'll say equals sum. Then this asks me whatever I want to do. Even more easier, at times, you may not know which function exactly will help you do whatever operation that you want to perform in Excel. But look, you can actually find the functions very easily because yes, you may not know all the functions. But when you know how to navigate through Excel and find the appropriate functions, then it comes easier. Over here, from the function box, we have this FX icon here. When you click on this, you can add a brief description of what you want to do, then Excel will give you a suggestion of formulas. If let's say, for example, here, what do we want to do? We want to simply add values within this range. So I'll just say here my description, add values within a range, or just add values as it is. All right. So once I do that, then I say go. Then Excel gives me here a sample of functions or some functions which will help me perform the operation which I've just described here. We have got the largest functions, the largest functions, and then we also have the sum function. Of course, each and every function is attached with a description here. So you will basically read the description and see if that function best suits what you want to do. So what I want is the sum function, which adds all the numbers in a range of cells. So, well, we didn't know which function to use, but there we go. Excel quickly tells us that, look, whatever you want to do, we can quickly perform it using the sum function. Great. So I'll come back here. Then I'll just say equals sum. Then it asks for number 1, number 2, number 3, and all that. So basically what you're supposed to key in here, the bracket that you normally see, and this will always be available in any Excel function, this is the one that you now need to understand. In any other function that we'll be using, make sure that you clearly understand the concepts in this bracket here. And the contents in this bracket here, simply, they tell us what we are supposed to key in currently. When you say sum, it means that you want to add some values. So Excel asks you, number 1, number 2, number 3, simply meaning the values which we want to add. But instead of entering these as they are, it will be time wasting. So I'm just gonna come here and then I highlight all the values which I want to add, which are simply the project costs. Once done, I will execute by hitting on enter from my keyboard. And there we go. So realize that the total project cost is, let me just format this into dollar format. There we go. 4,000,000 and 41,401.83. I can just do away with the decimal so that we get to 0 decimal point. So this is our total project cost for all the projects. Or even more simpler, we can also do this by simply saying Alt equals. When you are on the home tab, then you come here to this icon from the editing group. When you click on that drop down, then you place your cursor on sum. It tells you that for you to use the sum function, you can also use the alternative Alt equals. All right, that's a keyboard shortcut for summation. So I'll just move down here, and then instead of following all that process, I just say Alt equals, and there we go. I got the value, the same value. Now, it's also important to understand that Alt equals is not only for values which are arranged vertically. It also works for values which are arranged horizontally. See this sample. If I have some random values here, sorry, I want to arrange them horizontally. So if I have some random values here, like that, then I want to get their totals, then there at the end, I'll just say Alt equals, and there we go. We get the total sum. So Alt equals is the keyboard shortcut for adding. Our function number 2, which is a very basic one, which is important for each and every person to understand. I want to get the mean over our total cost. So I want to get the mean cost of whatever that we spent, all right? So which function am I going to use? Of course, we know that mean is total over the number. I could do a count of these values that I have here, then I divide by the total value here, then I get the mean. But that will just be time wasting. Why do that when I have Excel? So I will simply use the average function. Before I proceed, it's important to mention that understanding Excel functions is very easy. You simply need to do some basic English interpretation and you easily find the function that you want to use. Or more alternatively, you can also check it from the assistant here on FX, the way we did it for the sum, and you'll be good to go. So, well, I want to find the mean. I want to find here the mean. So I'll simply say equals average. That is what I want. So before you use any function, of course, Excel gives you the some brief description of what that function does. So once I type equals average, Excel tells me that this returns the average, that is arithmetic mean of its arguments, which can be numbers or names, arrays or references that contain numbers. Is that the function that I want to use? Of course, you can see that I have average A over there. I have got average ifs, and then I also have average. Okay. So what I want to use is the average, because if you look at the descriptions of all these other functions, they do not, of course, fit whatever I want to do. So I'll simply go back and use the average function. So I want to get the average for each and every project, right? I want to get the average for every project. So I'll just say average, and then once again, I will highlight all the values. But this time around, be careful not to highlight the value for the sum, all right? Remember, this was for the total, so be careful not to highlight this one. I'll only highlight all that. So once done, once again, I will also execute that, and it gives me a value of 505,175. Okay, 505,175. So that is what I have as my mean. Well, I hope we are moving on well. Next, we want to find here how many values do we have. So we are going to look at some basic Excel functions which are used for counting. And here I have two functions. The first one, I will say count. So if you look at the count function, what does it do? It counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. It counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. Well, that's what we want. I'm just going to say here count, and then assume now I count all this as it is. Then I get the value. It's giving me 8. Okay? if once again I perform another function here, count, and then I say equals count, then what do I do here? I simply highlight all the projects so that I see what was the total number of projects that we had. So if I highlight all the projects, when I do count, I get a value of 0. So what do we realize here? We realize that the count function only counts numbers within a range. It do not count texts. It only counts numbers. That is why when we highlighted the project costs, we were able to get a value of 8 because these are numbers. But when we highlight the project names, we are getting a 0 because these are texts. So if you want to do a count of texts, then the function to use is what you call here counter. So I'm going to say here counter. We have counter. What does it do? Counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty. Look at what the counter function does. It counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty. How about the count function? The count function counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. You get the difference? Count is for numbers, counter, anything, so long as it's not empty. So if I want to do that, I'll just use the counter function. Then the values, I will highlight everything here. And there we go. So we now also get 8 over there. So if I come here and I change, assume that this is not medical, assume I do something like 65, it's still 8. Okay? If I come here and delete that, it then gets to 7 because it's now a blank. So I'll definitely get this back to medical. And there we go. So I'll change this to be counter. And then the first one is count. So get to know the difference. The count function only counts numbers. The counter function only counts all the cells which are not empty, all the cells which are not empty. All right. Again, I also want to find here what was the minimum cost that we spent on a project. What was the lowest cost that we spent on a project? And here I'm going to use the minimum function. So I'm going to use the minimum function. Actually, it's not minimum. It's known as min, M-I-N. So it returns the smallest number in a set of values and ignores logical values and text. I challenge you at this time, anytime you want to use Excel functions, always make sure that you read the description of that function that you are using. Before you execute that function, read the description and make sure that whatever description is attached to that function describes what you want to do. Once you confirm that, you can go ahead. So number 1, number 2, once again, I will highlight all the costs. And there we go. Someone is I'll be giving you those as we continue. But again, also a reminder, like I said before, I have opened a TikTok account. So if you want to learn more of advanced Excel shortcuts, I challenge you to follow my TikTok account for such advanced Excel shortcuts. So I will execute that. And the lowest amount that we spent on a project was 47,545. If you walk through even through a manual search, you'll be able to realize that that was actually the lowest amount. That was actually the lowest amount. Let me just put a bottom border here so as to differentiate my data from the workings. Yes. And then I want to find out the maximum amount that I spent on a project. So the maximum amount, this one, I will use the reverse of the minimum function and it will just be the max function. So the max function returns the largest value and set of values and ignores logical values and text. So once again, I will highlight the numbers in that order. So the highest value that I spent on a project was 1,593,812. And if we look at this is an amount that was spent on relief aid, and the lowest amount, which was 47,545, was spent on medical. Okay, so that is the maximum and the minimum function. Even more advanced, we may want to find out probably the maximum, or rather the mean, the average amount that was spent, say, by a different financier. Say, for example, the average amount that was spent by a PPP financier. This one now introduces us to what we call, once again, the average function. But this time around, we don't want to get, we just want to get the general average amount here, but we want to get the average cost of the amount that was spent here by project by what? PPP financials. So in this case here, the average function will actually not help us, because what happens with the average function? The average function returns the average of its arguments, which can be numbers or names. But if we walk through these other average options available, we have got average if, which says it finds the average for the cell specified by a given condition or criteria. We read that again. The average if finds the average for the cell specified by a given condition or criteria. And then we also have here the average ifs, which finds the average for the cell specified by a given set of conditions or criteria. So the difference between average if and average ifs is that in average ifs, we have more than one condition or more than one criteria. But when it comes to average if, we only have one condition or one criteria that needs to be met. So while in this case, you're going to do the average if, so I'll just say equals average if, and then we make it active. Now, once we make that active, here we have the range, the criteria, and the average range. Like I said before, it's important to understand different function or formula inputs so that you know how to go about it. Without understanding of this, you will not manage. So the average if function just gives us a display here, but you don't understand well what do we mean by the range, the criteria, and the average range. So to have a good understanding of this, once again, come back to your function box and click on this fx function here, which says insert function. So when you are here, then you can be able to quickly understand what do we mean by range. If Excel asks you for the range, what does it want? So range, if you come and read here, it says the range is the range of cells you want evaluated. The range of cells you want evaluated. Notice here that what do we have? Sorry, equals average if over here. So we have the range, we have the criteria, and then we have the average range. So when you click on FX here, the range says that it is the range of cells that you want evaluated. So what is the range of cells that you want evaluated here? Basically, it is the financials, okay? So we want Excel to evaluate here the financials, so we'll just highlight the financials. Then we go to criteria, and criteria, it says it is the condition or criteria in the form of a number, expression, or text that defines which cells will be used to find the average. Is the condition or criteria in the form of a number, expression, or text that defines which cells will be used to find the average. Just before I proceed, it's important that I let you know that once you key in the range, then your criteria must come from the range, because Excel evaluates the range and then looks at the specific criteria that you have specified, then picks that from the given range. So from here, we wanted to see the financials from PPP. I can directly click on this, or even more alternatively, I can just come and type PPP in that order. Then the average range. What you will notice is that once I type PPP, then I proceed to the next area. Excel automatically inserts quotations to this PPP, because it will be converted to what? In those quotations. Then the average range, these are the actual cells to be in the range are used. So they are the actual cells to be used to find what? The average. We want to find the average of the project costs. So these are the actual values to be used in finding the average. So I will highlight all the project costs. So once done, I'll just say okay. And there we go. So here, we're finding out that, well, the average for PPP financials was 381,910. So that is how we can use some basic Excel functions. And of course here, ladies and gentlemen, understanding these basic Excel functions is very much important for you. So it was important that before we proceed to more advanced functions, we start it here from the basics. We end it there for today. If you have not followed, or rather you have not subscribed to this channel, feel free to subscribe to this channel so that we move together as one. I will be glad to have you here as part of this family. Thank you and bye for now. Let's meet in the next video. Bye-bye.